Ya quedé bien convencido, ya no vuelvo a enamorarme, para no estar comprometido. Las promesas que juramos no pudieron ser placer. Ya no vuelvo a enamorarme, porque ya no sé querer. En un tiempo te burlabas de mi pobre corazón.
Gloria Anzaldúa wrote that being Mexican is a state of soul, not one of mind, not one of citizenship. Mexican cultures are much older than Mexico as a country. Mexico as a country has only existed for a couple of hundred years, but Mexican cultures are many thousands of years old. For a variety of structural reasons, many of our families have migrated northward over the years. Some of us call ourselves MiXicanos to signify that we are Chicanos or Mexicanos living in Michigan. Our history here includes significant contributions from activists, artists, educators, laborers, musicians, and other keepers of Mexican cultures. Most research investigating Latino history in Michigan, and the Midwest more broadly, begins by focusing on the 1910s and 1920s. Battle Creek's Latino history, however, predates this time frame because of what we know about Alberto Garcia and other Latinos who came to the area in the 1890s to work, learn English, and to study medicine. While Alberto and his sister Isabel were adopted by John Harvey and Ella Eaton Kellogg from Zacatecas, Mexico, the Kellogg's also adopted children from other parts of Latin America, including Cuba and Puerto Rico. There are newspaper articles dating as far back as the late 1800s, which detail Mexican-themed parties hosted by the Kellogg's at their mansion and at the sanitarium in Battle Creek. One such article describes a party held in 1892 in the following manner, quote, "But the making of tortillas attracted the most attention. 2 little Mexican children dressed in native costume hard at work during the entire evening making this their daily bread. The little girl knelt at the metate, a sort of crude stone mill by means of which she ground corn which had previously been soaked and hulled, as is their custom." End quote. The Mexican people in articles like this are never described as attendees or friends of the family, but as vendors or workers. While the Kellogg's believed there were important things to be learned from Mexican cultures in relation to healthy living, they also seem to have viewed Mexican people as primitive relics of an indigenous past that needed to be modernized. Today, Mexican Americans are often framed as immigrants, a description that, on its own, erases the complicated nature of U.S.-Mexico relations. What has driven migration to the United States from Mexico? In U.S. media, we tend to hear the same answers or assumptions repeated. We hear that Mexico is an economically poor country. We hear about cartel violence. And there is often an assumption that people want to move to the U.S., that they want to leave their families and their homes to come here. These are the reasons that are given for migration over and over again, so much so that they come to define who Mexicans are in the minds of many people in the U.S. But these explanations do not tell the whole story. What these answers erase is the role the United States has played in helping to drive migration from Mexico and other parts of Latin America to the U.S. The U.S. has a robust history of military conquest of Mexican territory. The Mexican-American War is not given much attention in school systems, but the war brought about monumental changes for both countries, resulting in the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that forced Mexico to surrender 55% of its territory to the U.S. This includes all of present-day Arizona, California, New Mexico, Texas, Nevada, and Utah, as well as parts of Colorado, Wyoming, and Oklahoma. And while this is often called the Mexican-American War, it could probably be more appropriately described as an invasion and a slaughter. There's a well-known story about St. Patrick's Battalion, which was a group of Irishmen who were conscripted into the U.S. military to help carry out this invasion of Mexico. But once they were here and saw what they were being asked to do was to murder innocent men, women, children, priests, and nuns in Mexico, they switched sides in the middle of the war and began fighting for Mexico. Today there is a plaque in Mexico City commemorating the battalion, and there's a folk song describing these events. A major reason this piece of history is important is because national conversations in the U.S. about immigration often stop short of incorporating critical analysis of the U.S.-Mexico border's history, and they tend not to acknowledge the great number of Mexican Americans with ancestral ties to North America and even to portions of the U.S. today. Throughout the 20th century, there was a great influx of Mexican people into the Great Lakes region due to companies in want of seasonal farm workers. Facing violence and poverty at home, many Mexicans joined the stream of workers from Texas to Michigan. While many came to the area to work on the railroads and in stockyards, automobile plants, and steel factories, the sugar beet industry alone hired more people of Mexican and Puerto Rican descent than any other employer in the region. In subsequent decades, many more Mexican people would begin to move to Michigan, including to Battle Creek, and the Latino community diversified to include people from many different parts of Central and South America, as well as the Caribbean. People have maintained identities and communities specific to their more localized parts of Latin America, yet a broader sense of Latino, Latine, or Latin American identity has also emerged over the years. In 1942, the U.S. and Mexico formally agreed to establish the Bracero Temporary Worker Program, but when it expired in 1964, the demand in the U.S. for this kind of labor remained strong. Analysts generally agree that the sharp four-decade rise in Mexican immigration after 1970, especially of undocumented people, was driven by a combination of factors. Research also suggests climate change has already been playing a significant factor for decades in driving people to migrate from Latin America to the U.S. U.S.-Mexico relations have additionally been defined by predatory trade policies such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA, that have displaced millions of Mexican workers and forced massive waves of migration northward. A large number of people in Mexico are dependent upon agricultural work, and for a long time this meant many people in Mexico owned and operated small farms. The reason NAFTA was so devastating for common Mexican people is that the policy allowed large, predominantly U.S. corporations to take over those industries, such as the corn industry. In effect, this policy destroyed the livelihoods of millions of Mexican people who were put out of work. NAFTA went into effect in 1994, and it is estimated that for an entire decade after this period, 1 million Mexicans migrated to the U.S. every year as a direct result. In both cases of the Mexican-American War and NAFTA, it is indigenous people who were disproportionately harmed. And this is why so many migrants who come to the U.S. from Mexico are indigenous people or indigenous descendants. Mexican-American history is U.S. history. This is true in part because large portions of the U.S. today used to be part of Mexico. As Gloria Anzaldúa put it, this land was Mexican once, was Indian always, and is.
In Monterrey and Cerro Gordo, we fought on as Ireland's sons. We were the red-headed fighters for freedom amidst these brown-skinned women and men. Side by side we fought against tyranny, and I dare say we'd do it again. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side.